The path to pro in Apex Legends has to be one of the worst in recent esport history, with an incredibly difficult system, almost zero opportunities, tournament organizers and admins who don't care, cheaters, bad servers, poor planning with incredibly long days falling on inopportune dates, with Pro League players smurfing to grief the tournament, and just so much more. Expecting you to spend months in these conditions and countless of hours grinding for a measly $0 prize pool and a potential shot of maybe letting you play in the Pro League. And I'm speaking as somebody who has given this an honest shot in the past, both with my own team or organization, if you may, playing for content, and with several mixed teams throughout the years. And it took me years of grinding in the Challenger Circuit tournaments to realize that it's just a rat race and most players will never make it out. And I want to preface this video with that all of this comes from me playing through a terrible system and only really sticking to it thanks to my desire to compete. But I hope that by shedding some light on how truly bad it is, maybe we will actually see some changes into the Apex Legends path to pro, and if at the very least one of the points I do address in this video are changed or addressed, then I believe it was all worth it. Because if a player actually gets into the Pro League, they rarely make it into the Pro League through qualifying as a full team, but rather by getting poached by Pro League teams looking for fresh talent. And the difficulty with succeeding as a full team starts with the way the system is set up. Because in order for any player to actually have a chance to get to the Pro League, which is the first point of where you go from being an amateur making zero monies to actually becoming a quote-unquote pro and potentially making some money, you have to go through the grueling Challenger Circuit, which has seen many iterations throughout the years, but the system remains more or less the same. The Challenger Circuit starts by taking any team with players who want to compete over the rank of gold and pinning them against other non-pro players. You then have to play through several rounds where you play 4 matches, 2 on each competitive map, and with the top 10 of that group qualifying into the next round and squaring off against the top 10 from another group. You go up the ladder like this until you get into the semifinals, in which there are 6 games instead of 4, and the same goes for the finals. But the problem with a battle royale like Apex is if you are down on your luck, a best of 4 series may not be enough to offset 1 or 2 really bad games. And it has happened that capable teams fall out from this cutthroat system way too early. These tournaments are notoriously long and require you to put away an entire weekend, generally spanning from Saturday morning until the finals on the Monday evening. These Challenger Circuit tournaments happen 4 times in the span of 1 split, with all competing teams collecting points based on where they were placed in each individual tournament, and then placed on an overall leaderboard where the top 20 or so, alongside the teams that won each individual tournament, qualify for something called either the Pro League Qualifier or the Last Chance Qualifier. The Pro League Qualifier and the Last Chance Qualifier are more or less the same, but with a different outcome depending on if it's split 1 or split 2 of the Challenger Circuit. In the Pro League Qualifier, the top teams of the Challenger Circuit are pinned against the bottom teams from the Pro League in sort of a qualifier/relegation system where the top, I think it's 10 teams qualify, or I guess re-qualify back into the Pro League, and the bottom 10 teams that don't really get anything. And in the case of the Last Chance Qualifier, all the Pro League teams who haven't qualified into the large championship by the end of the LGS year will play against the top Challenger teams with only 2 slots available up for grabs to qualify into this large, prestigious tournament. In both of these cases, the Challenger teams have gone through a grueling season for no pay, and they usually will have practice against other Challenger teams, not actually getting practice against the actual skill level that they will be competing against. So, due to how the system is set up, they will have infinitely less experience than the pro teams that they're up against. And there's a very clear skill disparity between the two as well, in part since they don't get to practice together. Many Challenger teams rarely make it past the LCQ or the PLQs, and if they do, they immediately get demolished once they get into the real grit of the Pro League, which obviously makes sense. The difficulty will increase as you move up the ranks. I'm not saying that Challenger players need to get an easy way into the Pro League where all the good teams and the players are and all the fame and whatever without having to work for it. But it's a very strict system generally designed to allow the Pro League teams to stay in Pro League and only really allow a select few teams to have a chance to get into the big leagues once or twice a year. Not only that, but the players who have been sitting in rosters in the Pro League but haven't seen any play, who then decide to play in the Challenger Circuit, actually receive 500 Challenger Circuit points towards their own team for every week of Challenger Circuit that they have missed. So they haven't played in the Pro League, they come into the Challenger Circuit, and they get a bunch of points. For reference, winning one Challenger Circuit nets you 500 points per player, meaning that former Pro League players are as valuable as someone who has won every Challenger Circuit tournament so far, and they get rewarded all these points just by signing up. There have been several teams that have qualified straight into the Last Chance Qualifier or the Pro League Qualifier without actually having played more than one of the 4 Challenger Circuits based on this rule alone. For example, on the European side of things, Team SBS is a newly formed team consisting of 3 members who all have been in the Pro League, with Ton being the only one having compete in this Challenger split. And thanks to these rules, the team has amassed 3,250 CC points, which practically automatically qualifies them into the Last Chance Qualifier. In another example, Bambino split with his Pro League team and teamed up with 2 other ex-Pro League players in the Challenger Circuit, abusing this 3 points rule. What's funny about this situation is that when the inequality was called out, Bambino defended it as they quote-unquote came from a higher tier, so they deserve it. But despite being a team consisting of such prestigious Pro League players, they got eliminated in the second round. You know, the round that has like basically just golds and platinums. But despite this, they could still play in a Pro League qualifier because they had a total of over 1,500 points each from the same rule. And as far as actually knowing what the hell is going on, the neglected aspiring pro player base never get to know what they're playing for until maybe in the middle of the season, either through the lack of information being released or just being super hard to find. And in some cases, they won't actually know until the season is done. They don't know if they're playing for a Last Chance Qualifier, for a LAN, or a spot in the Pro League. I mean, at the time of this video, we're about to head into the final out of the 4 tournaments this split, and the teams that are competing in the 2023 Split 2 of the Challenger Circuit still have no idea how many slots there actually are in the qualifier up for grabs. There is no way of knowing who actually made it at this point. And it does feel like a slap in the face for these Challenger players, since they have to grind in scrims for hours a day just to stay competitive, run through this long season against all these odds, and still, with or without the other issues that I will mention later in this video, have a very small chance of actually making it, or even getting paid or compensated for any of the time that they put in. In many cases, there's so much lack of information, and like I said, in most of these cases, there's so much information missing that the players themselves don't even know what they're playing for either. Let me hit you with an example. For the entire duration of Challenger Circuit Split 1 in year 3, so the previous split, not the current one, users were forced to accept the rules on Battlefy in order to sign up. But when opening the rules, where there typically would be a full document outlining the entire rules of conduct and the details and whatever, there wasn't actually anything. All they had to accept was a PDF with the words, "coming soon." And for the entire 4-tournament-long Challenger Circuit, the rules were never updated. So I guess that soon never really came. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that the admins and the people directly working with the Challenger Circuit do try their hardest to keep the show going, and who knows, maybe they're overloaded and maybe this is just a resource problem, but from the perspective of the players, the Challenger Circuit is completely neglected and really just comes off as nothing more than an afterthought. And one of the largest signs that something is wrong can be seen every single Challenger Circuit tournament. Before the tournament starts, users have an hour to check in so the admins know who's ready to participate and who can actually play, because as with most amateur tournaments, there will be a lot of no-shows. But then an hour later, once all of the teams have confirmed and they have signed in, participants can be forced to wait up to another hour for the teams to be seated so the tournament can actually begin. And while I honestly have no idea how this looks on the back end, forcing players to wait up to an hour after the starting time to actually begin playing is just ridiculous. And it happens almost every tournament. And that's, you know, assuming the game actually works flawlessly once the seeding is done, because in many cases, it doesn't. And whenever there are issues mid-game, such as laggy servers, crashes, or whatever can go wrong in a typical game of Apex at this point, admins either randomly or selectively do restarts for certain teams, with many teams being forced to play out the most important tournament of their career with one man down. And remember, they only get a few shots of doing this a year. They only have 4 games to actually make it count, and if they don't perform near perfectly for the entire super long split, they will fail to make it until the next round. So if they have issues that stop them from performing to their full potential or just outright playing the game, odds are they might not make it to the next round, and as such, lose out on their entire tournament run. And there actually have been countless of misunderstandings with the rule sets throughout the Challenger Circuit's history, randomly barring players from competing or selectively enforcing the rules against some players while ignoring the same rules for others. The first one that comes to mind is the From Nowhere situation. The team From Nowhere had been blazing through the Challenger Circuit tournament in Split 1 in 2023 and ended up winning that whole tournament. Seeing as they had won, this would qualify them into the Pro League qualifier and would mean that they weren't required to play anymore. However, when From Nowhere signed up for the second one out of the 4 Challenger Circuits as they wanted to keep playing and practice and supposedly get more points, there were tons of complaints from the rest of the Challenger Circuit competitors who didn't think that they should be able to keep playing. And some even said that the rules themselves didn't allow them to compete if they had won one tournament. After a long pause, the admins listened and ended up disqualifying From Nowhere from competing in that one tournament, meaning they had to sit it out, not get any practice or get any points. But it turns out that according to the rules, you're supposed to be allowed to keep playing in the Challenger Circuit even if you automatically have qualified into the Pro League qualifiers, but for whatever reason, the admins didn't seem to know and chose to disqualify a team that should have been allowed to play. And this next situation might be more familiar for you guys from the US because we're talking about an American streamer, namely Caution, the well-known Pathfinder player, had signed up to the ALGSCC, but then was not allowed to play after it was made known that he hadn't reached the Silver 4 ranked requirement that you need to have in order to be eligible to play. While this isn't inherently wrong, that is what the rules say, and you can debate whether a minimum rank requirement is fair or not all day long, but that's not the issue here. That is the rule. It's super clear when you sign up. But the problem is that while Caution was deemed ineligible to play and as such missed out on competing in one of these very important tournaments, which is a big deal because keep in mind you practically need to play in every single one of these and get into the finals or higher if you want a shot of getting into the last chance qualifier. But while Caution was forced to sit this one out, there reportedly were several other teams who didn't meet the ranked requirements and still were allowed to play. This highlights a lack of care when verifying the ranks or selectively enforcing it by the admins. I don't know whichever is worse. And then of course when you had to sign up to play in the ALGS, the website make you choose one account to play on. Having access to this account and knowing which one it is beforehand allows the admins to make sure that you do fill the eligibility requirements, that you aren't banned or other important factors that we don't know about. At the start of every game, they also make sure that you are competing on the right account because in a custom lobby, all you can see is one's username, which is something that can easily be spoofed if you have something like Steam. This seems to be some type of tool that admins use to verify that you are indeed playing on the right account, but when it comes to console competitors, it has acted up a few times, with several users playing on the only profile that they have, that they've signed up on, but still being alerted by the admins that they are in fact playing on the wrong account. These users, when it's made known that they aren't playing on the right account, have been forced to sit those tournament games out, and any points that they have made previously as they played during that group are just forfeit. This has cost many teams their tournament runs, as they have no chance of making it through the very competitive lobbies without a full team. Not to mention the fact that we've had several occurrences of blatant cheaters making it through so many rounds of Challenger Circuit before finally actually getting caught after a lot of attention was brought to the issue. One of the more notable situations being the I'm Actually Faded situation, where Actually Faded and King Jelly, two very blatant wall hackers, were allowed to compete and cheat in the Challenger Circuit despite numerous reports. And while the very obvious evidence was right there, there didn't really seem to be any action by Respawn. And it was actually a third-party solo queue tournament called The Realm that made the first call to actually ban the two from competing, with the Challenger Circuit not really booting them out until much later when their accounts were banned. Then of course you have the GOZH and Plushka situations. These are two players who generally placed in the top 40 of the Challenger Circuit, suddenly dominating the GLL Masters tournament in the EU, and they actually went as far as to win the whole major with an incredibly solid performance amongst some incredibly stacked teams, with many teams feeling that something was afoot and going as far as accusing them of wall hacking mid-tournament. And it turns out that 2 weeks later, their win was actually disqualified, their Apex accounts were banned, and thankfully, they didn't compete in any official Apex tournaments ever since. And a problematic way that the tournament organizers do solve the issues of cheaters is by eventually banning the offenders from the tournament and potentially the game, and then giving the spot to another team who were just below the cutoff to qualify into that specific group. But at that point, generally speaking, the teams with a cheater have played several rounds already, and they have ruined the games and the integrity for countless of other teams, and the real competitive integrity move would be replaying every single round that the cheaters had infested. Sure, this would be a massive waste of time, but honestly, it would be the only fair solution, And honestly, most of the cheater teams are usually called out by the first round, so if the organizers or admins or whoever it is would pay attention to the accusations when it all began, they wouldn't be forced to remake any matches in the first place. And I personally honestly think that if you're already making these players play such long and draining days, making them stay available on holidays and the entire month-long tournaments where every single game matters, at the very least, you can make sure that things are done the right way. And speaking of cheating, that's something that brings me into a whole another can of worms. Also, probably this specific can of worms deserves its own video in the future, so make sure that you have actually subscribed not to miss it, that being the Heroes situation. Heroes, or WK as some of y'all might know them as, is the first known situation where a pro team signed up to play in the amateur challenger circuit. Why a pro team would choose to waste their time can vary on the players and the individuals, and it's really just up to speculation as to why they would do this. It is worth noting that Pro League teams are explicitly not allowed to play in the challenger circuit, and as such, this specific team had to keep their identity secret. And while it's very likely that there may have been more Pro League teams or Pro League players participating in the Challenger circuit for whatever reason, the intentions of the Heroes team was very clear. They were playing in the tournament to contest and throw the games for teams that they don't like, otherwise known as griefing them out of a tournament, just because they had beef with them and wanted to deny them that one opportunity that they got, which is just a certified hater banger. We know this because Clemmy, one of the members of Heroes, admitted as such after everything was made to light. Obviously, Heroes were dropped from the organization, and as far as I understand it, might get banned from competing again. At the very least, screwing up their reputations in a line of work where your reputation is everything, all to throw somebody else's tournaments that you don't even compete against just because you don't like them. And if that isn't a reason to throw your entire career away, I just don't know what is. But while the consequences for Team Heroes are currently unknown, Mind, one of the many teams that got griefed by them, went from the 6th place in the Challenger circuit to the 15th place, and it's looking like it's very unlikely for them to qualify into the last chance qualifier to split. And to this date, they haven't received any compensations for the tournament, and to this date, they have not received any compensation for the tournament that was understandably stolen from them. As I hinted, the Hero situation is the most well-documented one, especially because we saw repercussions and, the players themselves admitted to everything. But where there is smoke, there is a fire. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are plenty of other teams either bringing in Pro League players on Smurfs, sharing accounts to play on them, or even going into other Easter regions just to have a little bit of fun. Either way, we might need a lot more identification in these tournaments moving forward. And if you are trying to make it through the lower tier Apex scene, you better not try to be a mouse and keyboard player, because everyone strictly only wants a roller fragger nowadays, denying the opportunities of some amazing mouse and keyboard players because of how big of an advantage aim assist is in that role. Which is a shame, because a lot of really talented individuals have missed out on opportunities simply because of the input they play on. And this can of course both be a balancing issue where it's too strong, but also a community issue where too much emphasis is placed on the input rather than the player, and we just keep seeing roller fraggers being the majority getting poached into the Pro League, rarely if ever seeing skilled mouse and keyboard players break through the same way, and it is just such a shame. And I feel like I need to remind you, going through this endless slog of cheaters, poor planning, callousness by the admins, and spending your precious time on your holidays doesn't actually net you anything. Playing in the Challenger circuit leads to near zero exposure because not even the finals are broadcasted by Apex themselves. It leads to zero money as there isn't a prize pool, and the potential to be one of the very few teams that might make it into the Pro League or the Championship if you can hold your own against other teams who already are established in the Pro League. And honestly, in my opinion, other than playing for the sake of being incredibly passionate, it's just not worth it. Thank you guys so much for listening to my thoughts on this. I hope to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like, subscribe, and check out the video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Peace out.